Шановні пані та панове, вітаємо всіх.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone who is present at our event and watches us online. And right now we will listen to the presentation of a report from the Monitoring Mission on Human Rights in Ukraine. Matilda Bogner has the floor.
Good morning. Okay, thank you. This report, our 27th periodic report, covers the human rights situation in Ukraine between the 16th of May and the 15th of August this year. It highlights key concerns and makes a series of recommendations for moving the country forward and responding to the people's aspirations. I'm honored to be presenting this report for the first time. Since I arrived in July, Ukraine has undergone peaceful elections and the newly elected parliament has appointed a new government. This presents an opportunity to improve the human rights situation in the country. With its 7 offices in Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Kiev, Lugansk, Mariupol and Odessa, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission is present on both sides of the contact line. Every day we are in the field speaking to people affected by the conflict. Their needs are clear. They want the armed conflict to end, protection of their human rights and respect for their human dignity. We have been encouraged to hear that Ukraine's new leadership seeks to address the needs of the Ukrainian people and to enhance ties with citizens living across the contact line and in Crimea. These aspirations must translate into concrete action, and we are here to ensure that this is done in line with international standards. We offer our support for efforts towards peace and reconciliation, for without human rights there can be no sustainable peace. It is promising to see that the recent recommitment to the ceasefire on the 21st of July has resulted in a marked decrease in civilian casualties. We hope that this continues. Ukraine's leadership has emphasized messages of unity. We have been supporting a United Nations campaign to enhance social cohesion throughout Ukraine, to build a democratic and diverse society that leaves no one behind. Enhancing freedom of movement across the contact line and ensuring payment of pensions to all those eligible would be concrete measures echoing this message. These efforts must be accompanied by accountability. People deserve justice for human rights violations committed against them. Accountability of perpetrators regardless of their affiliation, and remedy and reparation for victims, regardless of their place of residence, will not only serve justice, but will also contribute to sustainable peace and reconciliation after a resolution of the conflict is found. For us, unimpeded operations and access are essential to be able to do our job effectively. While we enjoy freedom of operation in government-controlled territory, including confidential access to places of detention and detainees, our operations have been severely restricted in armed group-controlled territory for more than a year. We continue to be denied access to places of detention and detainees and remain gravely concerned about the conditions in detention and treatment of detainees in territories controlled by both self-proclaimed republics. In general, our ability to speak with victims and witnesses of human rights violations, as well as other interlocutors, remains restricted. Our discussions with representatives of the self-proclaimed republics on this issue have so far not brought tangible results. These restrictions prevent the international community from learning about past and ongoing human rights violations there. We call on the self-proclaimed republics to lift these restrictions in line with their declared commitment to human rights. In Crimea, the Russian Federation, as the occupying power, has still not granted us access to the peninsula in line with the UN General Assembly resolutions on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. As a result, we monitor the situation remotely from our offices in Kiev and Odessa. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission arrived in Ukraine in March 2014, prior to the conflict, to monitor and report on the human rights situation throughout the country and to make recommendations to the government and other actors in this domain. I'd like to address a few of these now. Part of our work involves monitoring the effects of the conflict on the civilian population. In the 3 months period covered by the report, 8 civilians, 4 men and 4 women, were killed and 60 were injured, including 9 children, due to the conflict. We are concerned by the spike in civilian casualties in June and July. You will find more details in the report. However, since the 21st of July recommitment to the ceasefire, civilian casualties have decreased dramatically. Since the 21st of July, we have recorded 7 civilians injured in the course of hostilities. Today, civilian casualties are the lowest for the entire conflict period, which has so far taken more than 3,300 lives. We hope this downward trend will continue into the future. We are glad to see steps that have been taken to increase compliance with international humanitarian law, including the creation of the Civilian Casualty Mitigation Team within the Joint Forces operation in January 2019, which the United Nations Secretary General highlighted in his report on the protection of civilians in armed conflict. The development of the National Strategy for the Protection of Civilians in Armed Conflict is another positive step that will need to be followed by the preparation and implementation of an action plan. We hope these efforts will have concrete results and contribute to enhanced accountability. As Prime Minister Honcharuk has said, those affected by the conflict on both sides of the contact line should receive assistance. We have been making this call since the beginning of the conflict and want to highlight our offer of advisory services to ensure that such assistance is delivered in line with international standards. The Cabinet of Ministers resolution on the provision of compensation to families whose houses have been destroyed due to the conflict is a positive sign. However, our initial analysis has identified a number of concerns set out in the report. Notably, the requirement that those seeking compensation must still be residing in the same settlement as their destroyed property. We are also concerned that the budget for this may only be available after 2020, too long for families in need of housing to wait. The loss of a loved one is an irreplaceable loss. However, at minimum, people's rights to reparations should be upheld. While during the reporting period, there have been court cases awarding reparations to families who have lost relatives, the government has appealed the decisions and families have not yet received remedy for their loss. The decisions should be implemented and remedy provided as a matter of priority. We have seen positive developments to improve freedom of movement across the contact line. For example, the disengagement at the crossing at Stanitsia Luganska is very welcome. We hope that repairs on both sides of the bridge will be completed by the end of November as planned. We have seen positive developments to improve freedom of movement. I'm repeating myself. We also welcome the Cabinet of Ministers' adoption of new regulations simplifying the movement of individuals and transfer of goods across the contact line. These initiatives should be built on, including through an increase in crossing points and further enhancement of crossing conditions. Over the last 5 years, due to a discriminatory policy of verification of places of residence, hundreds of thousands of pensioners on the other side of the contact line have lost their pension payments. Pensions should be made to all those eligible regardless of their place of residence. This is a long outstanding recommendation, and we hope it will be addressed as a priority by the new government. In addition, it is urgent that a mechanism be found so that the pension fund provides their pensions accumulated in arrears. Over the reporting period, we continued to document cases of arbitrary detention, torture, and ill treatment on both sides of the contact line. Though the number of such cases remained considerably lower than in previous years, especially if compared to 2014 to 2016, the fact that they still exist shows how deeply these vicious practices are entrenched. They must be stopped. We also documented dreadful conditions in detention and the use of forced labor in penal colonies in the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic. Some of those who refused to work were punished and placed in solitary confinement. Others were forced to sign statements that they were willing to work for free. It is encouraging to see that the practice of voluntary transfers of pre-conflict prisoners from territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic to government-controlled territory continued. As of the 15th of August this year, a total of 319 pre-conflict prisoners, including 11 women, had been transferred from territory controlled by the Lugansk People's Republic to government-controlled territory. And just last Thursday, 54 pre-conflict prisoners were voluntarily transferred from territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic. We also hope that this practice will resume in territory controlled by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. We hope that the appointment of a new Prosecutor General and the new Chief Military Prosecutor will give renewed impetus to investigations of conflict-related and other grave human rights violations and prosecution of perpetrators irrelevant of their affiliation, be it members of the Ukrainian law enforcement or military or armed groups of the self-proclaimed republics. Past cases of grave violations must be addressed. 5 years on, families are still waiting for justice for those who were killed and suffered violent deaths at the Maidan and in Odessa on the 2nd of May 2014. Investigations and trials must continue and be pursued in an effective and timely manner. We are concerned to learn that terrorism charges have been laid against individuals who have helped people to submit complaints to the International Criminal Court and the European Court of Human Rights. I would like to recall that according to the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, I quote, "Everyone has the right, individually and in association with others, to unhindered access to and communication with international bodies." As we see, such terrorism charges have already had a chilling effect on the enjoyment of the right to seek legal redress in international courts, and we consider it completely unacceptable. We are also encouraged by increasing support for the ratification of the Rome Statute and call for its prompt ratification. The Constitutional Court's annulment of Article 176.5 of the Criminal Procedure Code on the 25th of June this year was a positive development that has already begun to show results. This article, introduced in October 2014, removed the right to be considered for release and imposed automatic detention for those prosecuted in conflict-related cases. That is to say, those accused of undermining national and public security or prosecuted in relation to the armed conflict. International standards state that pretrial detention must be the exception and not the rule, and effectively reviewed by a court. In more than 25 cases since the annulment, judges have released defendants on bail, sometimes after years of detention and protracted trials. We will continue to monitor how the practice evolves. We followed the human rights situation closely during the parliamentary elections in July. The newly adopted electoral code was vetoed by the President, giving the Parliament 30 days to amend it. We will follow further developments in this regard. In the meantime, we urge the Parliament to take measures to enable IDPs and labour migrants to vote in the scheduled 2020 local elections. We have recorded 9 attacks against journalists since the 16th of May. The death of Vadim Komarov on the 20th of June this year, following a brutal beating 6 weeks earlier, was shocking. On 20th of July, we commemorated the 3-year anniversary of the death of the journalist Pavel Sheremet. The culprits remain free to this day. On 30 July, members of extreme right-wing groups violently attacked the office of a news agency in Kiev, injuring 3 staff members, one of whom was hospitalized. We urge the timely and effective investigation of these attacks. As long as impunity prevails, we can expect more attacks and a chilling effect that leads to self-censorship and a reduction in freedom of expression. Several large peaceful gatherings occurred during the last 3 months, notably the Kiev Pride March and Odessa Pride March. There was a notable improvement in how these were policed. That said, we documented several attacks on participants, including on people supporting or belonging to the LGBTI community. The first Kharkov Pride March happened over the weekend. We welcome that it was able to go ahead following initial resistance, but were alarmed at the violence committed by extreme right-wing groups following the march, leading to the arrest of 17 people. We urge the authorities to ensure that investigations and prosecutions classify the crimes appropriately as hate crimes rather than hooliganism in all of these cases. The law strengthening the role of Ukrainian as the official language entered into force on the 16th of July. In order to ensure a fair balance between the protection of the rights of minorities, freedom of expression, and the promotion of the state language as a tool for integration within society, we encourage the Cabinet of Ministers to prioritise the development of a law on the rights of minorities and indigenous peoples through an inclusive and consultative process. In Crimea, the Russian Federation has continued to transfer detainees to its territory, often punishing family members as a result. Detainees are separated from their families, who are often thousands of kilometers away. For example, Russian Federation authorities transferred a married couple from Crimea to 2 different penal colonies in the Russian Federation, located 500 kilometers from each other and also almost 1,000 kilometers from their 2 small children, who remained in Simferopol. They are not expected to be released until 2026. Another disturbing practice, which runs contrary to its obligations as an occupying power, has seen the Russian Federation bringing charges against people for content they posted on social media before the occupation, describing it as extremist. For example, in late May 2019, 2 Crimean Tatar women were convicted for having shared in 2013 a video considered by the Russian Federation authorities as extremist on social media. In our report, we recall that the Ukrainian government also has obligations towards its citizens from Crimea, notably to those who find themselves internally displaced in mainland Ukraine. They often fall between the cracks of the social welfare system. This is especially true for those who have rejected Russian citizenship and, due to fears of being deported, have to leave the peninsula at short notice. A first step would be to ensure that they have the requisite knowledge to access government assistance. I recently visited the administrative borderline and think it would be straightforward for the authorities to erect a simple notice board, for example, at the 3 crossing points with this basic information. This would help to send a signal to Crimean residents that the government is addressing their needs. Recent changes in Ukraine present an excellent opportunity for the further advancement of human rights for all people in Ukraine, wherever they are in the country, be it in Lviv, Sevastopol, Odessa, or Donetsk. People we speak to on a daily basis ask not only for peace, but to see their rights addressed and accountability for violations suffered. If the rights of people from around the country, including both sides of the contact line, are addressed, it will help to bring people together and demonstrate that there is no discrimination based on where people come from. We are here to support the enjoyment of human rights for all and to turn words into action in line with international standards. We hope that our recommendations will assist in moving this agenda forward, and we are ready to continue this dialogue going forward. Thank you.
Шановні
Dear guests, we have time for questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. If there are no questions, thanks to all of you, and see you soon.
Okay, thank you.